Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoiler-free review of House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J Maas. This is the first book in the Crescent City series, which is Sarah J Maas's adult urban fantasy trilogy. I think it's a trilogy. I don't know if it's gonna be more books than that. And I wasn't sure I was gonna read this book, but the FOMO got me, particularly on TikTok, because the second book just came out recently, which I have not read yet. But I decided that I was gonna read this, and I ended up basically vlogging the whole experience on TikTok. So if you want my in-depth thoughts and discussions and live reactions to basically everything, go and check out my TikTok. It's thoughtsontomes_, it's linked down below. You will get a play-by-play of everything. But this is my spoiler-free review if you don't want all the details. So just a bit of backstory in case you aren't familiar of my history with Sarah J Maas. I read the first 3 Throne of Glass books. I know I'm gonna get people in the comments like, oh my god, you stopped when it got good. I felt personally betrayed by the series as a Kale and Selena shipper, so I stopped, and then just a lot of people that felt the way that I felt about the earlier books didn't like the later books, so I might continue at some point, not in any kind of hurry. I've also read the ACOTAR books, the first 3. The last book I read by her was ACOWAR. I do plan on continuing that series. I have A Court of Silver Flames in my Kindle, I just haven't read it yet. And while I had heard about this book, I wasn't necessarily super intrigued to jump on it right away. I thought I'd probably read it eventually, but whatever. So I have conflicting feelings about Sarah J Maas's books, and yeah, so I wasn't sure how I was gonna feel about this, and that's why I vlogged the whole experience. But let's talk about this. This follows the main character, Bryce, and she's a half-fae, half-human, and she's living in this city that has all different kinds of fantasy creatures. I'll talk about that more in the world building. At the beginning of the story, something happens where she ends up losing a number of her loved ones, and that just really rocks her world. And so then we follow her actually a couple of years later when things start popping back up surrounding that murder, and she is kind of pulled in to investigate. It's a little bit shaky footing on why she's tapped to investigate, but anyway, we'll talk about that. And everything kind of goes from there. There are trigger warnings in here for torture, gore, violence, slavery, death of loved ones, drug use. Is that everything? Maybe. There's a lot of triggers in here. So first off, I'm gonna talk about the world building. This is urban fantasy, and as you guys have heard me talk about recently, I really love urban fantasy. This is not the strongest urban fantasy world that I have read. I did like most of it, I would say. There's some things that are a little bit spotty. What I will say is that the way this is written, as far as the actual world building, is incredibly info dumpy, and basically everybody says that. The first 200 or so pages, well actually I don't think it lasts about 200 pages. 200 pages are just slower. But the first few chapters is just a ton of info dumping in the world building, when really this book should have an index. This is a great book for an index that people could reference, and instead of just telling us every little detail, maybe just let us discover it organically and put more stuff in the index, but she didn't do that. She just told us basically everything, and it's kind of hard at the beginning to sort through what's going to be important and what's not, and I just don't tend to like super info dumpy world building. I think that can be done way better, particularly in urban fantasy. But once we got through that, I ended up liking this world. I like any urban fantasy world that has every kind of magical creature, and that's what this has. I mean, there's everything. There's fae, there's angels, there's demons, there's werewolves, there's every kind of shifter, there's chimera, there's sprites, there's mermaids, there's everything, okay? So I like worlds like that, but I do think it could have been introduced better in a way that made more sense to people. Next, we'll talk about our characters. Our 2 main characters that we follow are Bryce, and she's our main character, and then we have Hunt, who is this angel that she gets paired up with to do this investigation. And while I liked both of them, I wouldn't say that they're my favorite of the characters. If you hear that, that's Kit running around in the background having the zoomies. Bryce in particular, and I think this is sort of just a Sarah J Maas thing from the other books that I've read, she very much gives not other girls vibes sometimes, or just very perfect at everything but for no reason. That happens a lot. The reason that she gets tapped to be part of this investigation is very flimsy, so even the fact that that's a thing. And then also in this book particular, everyone that she runs into thinks she's hot, which I get, I'm sure she's very pretty, but it becomes pretty insufferable that everybody, it's just all the time. So that can be a little bit frustrating. So because of those reasons, even though Sarah J Maas was trying to depict her as sort of this perfect character, she can kind of grate on me. And also I found that throughout the story, she didn't really have a ton of growth arc wise, as far as learning from past behaviors. She does a lot of things over and over again that haven't worked and continue to not work, and she still continues to do them to a point where it becomes really frustrating. And there are some things as far as character conflict that don't make a ton of sense as far as character personalities. I feel kind of similarly about Hunt, although Hunt grates on me slightly less. He still did do some things where I was again, why? Like, why did you make those choices that don't really make a ton of sense? It seems like it's more shoehorned in because the plot needs to go in a certain direction and then that you actually wouldn't make those choices. And it did take me a while because they obviously kind of start to form like a little bit of romance. If you know Sarah J Maas books, you know that. And it did take me a while to get kind of on board with them. I end up liking them by the end, but they're not probably like my favorite of the Sarah J Maas couples or of like fantasy couples in general, but I did like them more towards the end and there were some things that I did like. This does have a little bit of spice, but not a ton, but I will say that the spice stuff actually felt a little bit out of place here. Like I get that she's like, oh, I have to make it spicy because it's my adult book and so it has to be spicier than like my YA and new adult, but a lot of times like the sex scenes or like the sexual thoughts that either of the characters were having by each other felt like so out of place, would like ruin the momentum of the story because we would have this little like aside for like a sex scene or like a, you know, sex thoughts, whatever. So that was a little bit like odd. It didn't really flow well. But again, I end up liking them as a couple by the end, like liking them enough. I will say the strength here with the characters are actually much of the side characters. Like I think the side characters are probably my favorites. There were like so many different, again, creatures and things that I really liked. Her brother Rune is probably like my favorite character in the book, and we do get his POV sometimes, but like I wish we got more. I love him. And just there's a bunch of other characters that I just think were like almost more complex because we get less of them. Like I think she tries to make her main characters almost like so perfect that they end up feeling a little bit more two-dimensional, where her other characters feel much more like well-rounded. Lastly, we talk about the plot. This book, everyone talks about it and warned me when I first started reading it that it takes a while to get into, and that like the first 200 pages especially are like very slow before we get into like the meat of the story. And then there's even parts like throughout that are just, they ruin the momentum. There's like too much sort of like fluff and breaks for things and starting to like put sort of day of life stuff in there when like there's really important big plot things happening. So the last bit of it was my favorite. Pretty much everyone says that like the end is like really good, but there's even parts at the end that I felt like the writing and the way that it was depicted was like left you at a distance or pauses you at weird points, and like the pacing was just super off in this book. There were some twists and things that I thought were really cool, didn't see coming. I actually made a lot of predictions that I like did see coming, which was really fun. Again, if you follow like the whole TikTok journey, you get to see that. But I will say that I think this book would be so much stronger if her editor edited. Like this book is 800 pages. I think it would be so much stronger at 500 to 600 pages. You could still have a very long book, but like there's so many things that could have been cut out and impacted the plot. None. Impacted like what you know about the characters. None. Like there was just so much extra stuff in here that didn't need to be. I think that if you just like tightened up some of the writing and the plot and things, it would have been so much stronger of a book for it. So ultimately for me, like for every good thing, there's kind of a bad thing. Although overall I did enjoy it generally. Like there were a lot of things that were some glaring problems, but I could overlook it for some other things. I think Sarah J Maas really thrives with, like I said, side characters and really emotional moments. Like she has some scenes that I think are so good, which is why if you cut out some of the extra bits, the books would be so much stronger. So anyway, I gave this between 3.5 and 3.75 stars. With some editing, it would be a solid 4. I do plan on continuing with the series. I'm gonna read the second book, but probably not until next month or even over the summer because I do need to break between books. Otherwise, I think I would get really frustrated with some of these glaring issues, but I still overall enjoyed it. I do wanna know more, and I will also be trying to clip together my TikToks of me going through the books for my discussion video because I don't wanna make a separate discussion when I've talked about all of this already at length on TikTok. So if I manage to do that while this video is coming out, I will link that on the screen. If not, look for that at some point in the future. I don't know how complicated of a process that's going to be because I'm filming this before trying to do that. So we will see. Check that out if you want more of my in-depth thoughts. Check out my TikTok if it's not up yet here. But comment below, let me know what you thought of House of Earth and Blood. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.